Hello and welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, October 17th. And as always, we're gathered to do our work today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. Could I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Greenlaw. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. On to our first item is reports, and we have Mr. Russell and Miss Boxrud to present to us. So the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, Council. My name is Heather Boxrud, General Manager of Financial Services, and my pronouns are she, her, so I can be addressed accordingly. I'm joined by Roland Russell, Senior Financial Analyst, as well as we have a number of our budget managers here in chambers or online to support Council in the discussion today. The objective of today's meeting is for Council to proceed with a public engagement event in the 24 to 28 financial plan as presented or amended. Next slide. So in terms of the overall financial plan timeline, as you can see on the graph above, with today being in red, we are currently at the midway point of the financial planning process. The next step is to bring the financial plan to the public information event on November 15th. And we'll have 2 workshops for Council to consider the public's feedback and make necessary changes. 3 readings and adoption will then occur in December. So in interest of time, I won't go into the details of the guiding principles, but to remind Council that the district conducts its financial planning process as outlined in the long-term financial plan, guiding principles, and the financial plan policy, which has 4 principal categories that were developed in guide management and Council in the financial planning process. They are stable and sufficient, sustainable and equitable, prudent and flexible, and efficient and measurable. Next slide. So the overall financial plan is prioritized by risk, life safety, legislation, and the district strategic plan. The financial plan project package also indicates the drivers of why a project is incorporated into the financial plan. The financial plan considers where staff capacity is needed to meet service level requirements and the strategic plan initiatives. This methodology is used for projects as well as the operating budget. Next slide. So this year has been an incredibly challenging yet productive year with increased cost pressures, increased borrowing costs, a growing community with diverse needs, housing shortages, an ambitious strategic plan, labor market competitiveness, and several large facility construction projects underway. Inflation and supply chain continue to be a challenge, which is felt across all departments and within all projects. Transit expansion continues to be a priority, a community priority, and requires an annual investment. The district has invested significantly in aging facilities with upgrades to Brennan Park Recreation Centre, 2 new fire halls, and the Public Works facility, which has been funded through land reserves, grants, and borrowing. The increased costs associated with borrowing are spread across the several years in the 24 to 28 financial plan. The 2023 fiscal service level changes focused primarily on labor contracts for the fire department. The RCMP union contracts result from the transit strike and organizational structure during the spring amendment. The costs associated with these have annualization impacts on the 24 to 28 financial plan. The district continues to be challenged with staff resources as the community continues to expand and change service level expectations. Additional progressive strategic initiatives are added and new capital projects are added that require operating and maintaining. Finally, the 24 to 28 financial plan has incorporated the district's efforts towards the proactive management of the district's assets through a phased reserve funding strategy to meet the goals of the Council's endorsed 2022 asset management report. Next slide. The results are the 24 to 28 financial plan has taken a thoughtful and measured approach to addressing these cost pressures, and we are incredibly proud of the efforts that staff have made to create a financial plan despite mounting economic and market challenges. Some highlights include the service level change strategy is to limit the 2024 to service level maintenance, which is just the additional resources required to maintain current service level expectations. This is after several years of minimal investment due to focus on labor contract negotiations, pandemic and post-pandemic limitations. As the capital plan requirements continue to grow, a major methodology shift and process improvement for the district is to attribute the staff that are focused on capital implementations to be funded by those capital projects themselves. This improvement ensures the accurate cost of the capital project is captured and accounted for and allows the district the flexibility to scale resources to support capital implementation, including consulting support. District staff have made tremendous efforts to absorb inflation costs where possible throughout the operating and project budgets. As well, initiatives were reprioritized and delayed where possible to keep budgets as consistent as possible year to year. Staff have maximized funding opportunities, leveraging external funding sources and utilizing provisions to smooth in costs year to year. The district improved cash flow management processes in 2022 to include a temporary borrowing, which allows the district to delay large long-term debt issuance by managing cash flow for construction of capital projects through small and short-term temporary borrowing. Finally, the district introduced a concept of tax stabilization in 2022. It's a budget process improvement that provides council with the opportunity to smoothen costs by utilizing the previous year's unused tax surplus. So with that, I will now turn it over to Mr. Russell, who will walk you through the details of the 24 to 28 financial plan workshops to date.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council, members of the public who may be with us. I'm going to walk you through the various sections of our 24 through 28 capital plan, overall budget, the whole financial plan, section by section, and we will pause at the end of the sections to provide an opportunity for council to ask questions with respect to items that have been raised in that area. So hopefully that will keep my talking to a minimum and your ability to ask questions maximized. So with that, we'll get started. I should comment that I'm going to step through a lot of material that has been presented to council previously fairly briskly. Won't be delving into the details, but more just an overview of the highlights, and our emphasis is on providing council with an opportunity to address questions as they arise. Okay, as soon as I get my mouse pointing. So I'd like to start with a summary of the general fund, and just to give council an opportunity and a reminder, so to speak, of where we've landed for 2024. We would outline that overall tax revenue requirements have gone up by 8.9%, and that equates to approximately $213 on the average residential tax bill. You'll note that the number that you see in brackets is the impact on the average residential, to save me having to repeat that every time. You'll see that non-discretionary makes up a very, very large and significant portion of that at 7.9%. Service level changes and special operating projects are 3.2%, and our asset management is 2.4%. Against those items, we are showing reductions of approximately 3% for non-market change, and also the application of tax stabilization, which would reduce this by a further 1.6%. So on an overall basis, we're anticipating a 8.9% increase in revenue requirements for 2024. See if I can get this to go. It's not. So I will go like this. Excuse me. Within the general fund, we have broken our non-discretionary costs into three areas: inflationary, growth related and other non-discretionary, and changes in debt servicing. And we'll outline what the cost factors are in each of those areas. With respect to the inflationary non-discretionary, this is primarily driven by labor contract changes, which in 2024 total $1.3 million year over year. There's also a number of miscellaneous inflationary items, some of which have been listed here, and they're $460,000 for the ones that you see here. With respect to growth-related non-discretionary items, we have annualization of prior year service level changes, and those would be some of the changes, that Ms. Boxford spoke of earlier. And that's primarily additional positions and that were added in 2023. And then a portion of those costs have been split over multiple years. It also reflects, as you can see here, increases related to the fire contract settlement, the multi-year library settlement, and Oceanfront Park. Other non-discretionary items, there's a small grouping here, and you can see some of the larger items have been identified. And finally, with respect to non-discretionary changes, we're outlining the changes in debt servicing levels. So what we would like to should be noted that with respect to these in 2023, this is reflecting a delay in some of the projects, specifically Public Works and Honex Sea Dike. And in 2025, we will see the debt servicing for the Fire Hall #2 and the Sea Dike begin to impact our operating budget. And so what you will be seeing is that the debt servicing costs for facilities and for infrastructure will go up significantly compared to what you're seeing today, just because we have two new facilities whose financing will come into play. With respect to service level changes, there are a number of service level changes, and the overall value of service level changes for 2024 is $1.24 million. Primarily made up of service level maintenance adjustments, and those service level maintenance adjustments, as we have stated, have been restricted to areas where we require additional resources to maintain the services that we are currently providing. We've also identified a number of areas where the service level maintenance requirements are going to be capital funded. And so that effectively is additional staffing and resources required to support our capital program. And lastly, we have a transit expansion. In addition to this, I would like to make the comment that within the plan that you have and within the report that you have received, there's been an addition which was made by staff to reflect facilities planning and construction coordinator. To be fair, we had compiled the service level change document previously, and we said we missed this one, so it should have been included, and so we've added it now. It is funded by capital. It's basically support for our facilities construction group, and just to ensure, because we have a number of projects underway, to ensure that they're adequately resourced to allow us to maximize their effectiveness. And in addition to that, we noted that for the 2026 transit expansion, we'd included 4 months worth of revenue, which start in the first year, but we had not adjusted the future year's revenues for a full year. So we've increased those to basically to restate the cost for transit appropriately. We're going to provide you with this slide, which I know is a little small from here, but hopefully you can see what it outlines. What we would highlight in this is that this is not a blip, so to speak, in the radar. We are at a point within the community where we have significant demands upon our resources. And so we anticipate that we may see elevated requirements for funding over the next few years for the general fund, and that revenue requirement increases in the 8 or 9% range will probably be maintained over the next few years. And at this point, I will pause and turn the floor back to the chair, to the mayor, and we'll pause for questions on this section if you would like.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill, who's joining us online for those that are in the room. Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. And Mr. Russell, on that last point, just looking at the chart you just had up, it's page 14 of our package, I think. Sort of interpreting this big picture, what I'm seeing is that, if I'm interpreting it correctly, growth is effectively paying for itself, and the increases we're seeing, or the amounts we're seeing over the next few years, is largely driven by increases in service. It's more expensive to do the things we've already been doing, and then we are putting a lot more focus on asset management so that future councils don't have to deal with the same things that we've been dealing with. And those are the real cost drivers. And I just bring that up because people do tend to get concerned about whether or not growth is causing us more expense or not. But when I look at this, it looks like we are, the non-market change growth is covering most of the growth costs, and it's these other factors that are the key drivers. Is that an accurate reflection of what's going on here?
Through the chair, yes, I believe that that's a correct interpretation of this chart.
Do you have another question, Councillor Pettingill, or are you good for now?
No, I just wanted to make sure I was sort of interpreting these various categories and so on correctly for now. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamilton, then French.
Thanks very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Russell and Ms. Boxrood. For the tax stabilization increase, the 600K, it's my understanding we have a little bit more room for that tax stabilization. Could you remind me what the maximum number it would be for tax stabilization?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Yeah, so the tax stabilization is based on the prior year's surplus, which was at 900,000. So we're recommending 600,000 that would come out of the general operating reserve, or would not go, sorry, to the general operating reserve for the current year. That would maximize at 900,000. That also keeps the level of the general operating reserve at the minimum balance as per the general operating reserve policy, which is 9.5 million. Staff are recommending the 600,000 and not the full 900,000 for two reasons. You do have to pay that back. It adds onto the tax base in the future years, as well as with the cost inflation and cost pressure supply chain, having any buffer, certainly in contract negotiations as well, is nice to have if things continue to, the market conditions continue to go the way they are.
Thanks very much. And second question, when I look at, I'm sort of looking at broad, and this may be going into some details that if the answer goes into details, I'm happy to wait for later. But when I'm looking at the general increases from 2024 to 2028, I see that the general corporate line item is going from about 2 million to about 6 million, which is a tripling of the general corporate, which is a much higher increase from 2024 to 2028 than the other line items. Do you want me to point to where that is?
Through the mayor, if you would give me a minute, I could address that.
Yep.
Through the mayor, to address your question, Councillor Hamilton, general corporate incorporates the vast majority of costs associated with interest payments on debt. So the majority of that increase that you see is not per se changes in staffing or anything like that. It would be debt driven. You would also note, if you look further down on that chart, that you're seeing the debt repayment charges increasing significantly year over year to reflect the debt servicing costs associated with our new facilities. General corporate will be picking up the interest payments that go along with that. So that's probably the major driver of that significant increase year over year.
Yeah, just to be sure, I scrolled to the page. It's page 18 of 136 from the package. So is there, you say most of it is going to be debt repayment. Is there any way, do we have an expanded view of that at all? Can we see what fraction is interest repayment and what fraction is whatever else happens in general corporate?
Through the mayor, not readily, in that we have the information, but it's not in a format that's within the package that we've provided to you. We certainly could provide a breakdown or a comparison of the total debt servicing costs year over year and break it into its two components of debt servicing and interest. The other comment that I would like to add, which was just pointed out to me by Ms. Boxrud, is that also to note in 2028, we had included a one-time lump sum amount in general corporate to reflect changes in potential changes in wage rates. So we had not distributed the costs across all of the programs, the salary cost across all of the programs. We just took an estimate of the total salary costs adjustment, like the COLA adjustment, so to speak, and added it in one area. And of course, we would pick general corporate as the appropriate area because it's central. So there are two components. One is interest. The other is just a lump sum amount for salaries.
Go ahead, Ms. Boxer.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to add to what Mr. Russell is saying, so just in terms of the salaries component, that was merely because of the new software implementation. It's quite a lot of work to do the distribution across all of the segments. So for the 28, being that it's the furthest out and it's very much an estimate at this point, 5 years away for salaries, it was just added to one segment. So just to provide some more clarification there. As well as I just wanted to add a finer point on the debt servicing side of things. One of the improvements that we will be having in our Questica system is that we'll have a reserve continuity similar to what you see for all the reserves for debt. So it will really show you, it's not quite there yet, but will show you the breakdown of all of the payments as well as the interest. So the principal payments and the interest of the debt and what is being charged against that. So looking forward to that. It'll add some clarity in there.
Okay, so could we at some point in time for this budget cycle, could we receive a breakdown of where that general corporate line, how it breaks into interest and salary payment, salary increases? And I'm looking at that one because it is the largest increase over that 2024 to 2028. It's a tripling, and a $4 million increase in one line item. That's 10% of our current budget, right? So that's obviously a very big driver for the overall increases, and I'd like to get a better understanding of it. Thanks.
Through the chair, just spoke with Mr. Russell, and that can be easily done. So we can do that. We can provide that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor French, then Stoner.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Hamilton actually asked the tax stabilization question that I was looking for, and the answer we got satisfied what I was hoping to hear. So I don't have anything else at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. A few questions. The first one is detail oriented. So the Sustainable Transportation Coordinator position is proposed to come out of the transit provision for the first few years. And I just want to ensure, my understanding was that we needed that provision for potential upcoming capital improvements, like a bus exchange or a new bus depot. And so I'm just curious, the risk of using that transit provision for salaries at this point.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Dora Gunn, Transportation Planner with the District of Squamish. Thanks for the question. So my understanding, and I'm turning to Roland, Mr. Russell, to make sure this is correct, is that a portion of that for 2 years will come out of the transit provision, only about 40% of the total cost. Another 40% was proposed to come out of the alternative forms of transportation reserve. And then a final 20% comes from the fund, which comes from the province for climate change projects. And I can't remember the exact name of that fund. But so it's actually broken up into these 3 different portions. It's not all landing on the transit provision.
What is the alternative forms of transit provision? I have never heard of that reserve.
Through the mayor, it is not a reserve. It's not a provision. It's a reserve. When council receives CAC money, or sorry, I shouldn't say CAC. When council receives cash in lieu for parking, they can place that in the off-street parking reserve, or they can place it in the alternative forms of transportation reserve at council's discretion. Lately, like over the last 2 or 3 years, that money has been directed to the alternative forms of transportation reserve. Because this position is going to support both active transportation and transit related items, it was deemed appropriate that funding from the alternate forms of transportation reserve would be considered an appropriate use to support this position.
And so then how much is left in the transit provision?
Through the mayor, may I ask at what point in time?
In 2026, when this position then gets fully funded by taxation.
Through the mayor, I believe at that point in time, the value of the transit provision is approximately $300,000.
I don't want to, yeah. So I appreciate that I'm asking for very detailed numbers that are really far into the future. I think what I'm trying to understand is what is the risk that it puts us at to be able to fulfill our needs for the capital investments for future transit needs, and how much. So where is the balance? How do we know that we're going to have enough in our transit provision to build out the transit exchanges and things like that?
Through the mayor, I can attempt to answer that question. First of all, the transit provision has more than $600,000 in it right now. And so if we're taking 40% of 100,000 for 2 years, that's 80,000 over 2 years. So we're reducing 600,000 down by 80,000. So there should be a reasonable amount still left in there. Secondly, as far as paying for some of these capital projects, all of the larger capital projects, so exchanges or the transit maintenance facility, are shared projects with BC Transit. And so typically the way that is proposed to work is that they actually end up being operating costs, not capital costs. And so we pay for them over time through our annual operating agreement with BC Transit. And so using the transit provision is something that we could do gradually year over year to help reduce the operating costs, not so much capital cost.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I think similarly, or on not specific to the transit line, but just generally, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the annualization costs of the service level changes from 2024 to 2025. So am I correct in assuming that that number is the 2.1% in this table? Is that the annualization of the 2024 numbers, or does that also include forecasted additions in 2025?
Through the chair, the annualization value does not include forecasted changes for 2025. It would be the future year's cost of positions or cost increases that were recommended and approved in 2024.
So 2.1% is the cost of annualizing the changes in 2024 to 2025.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my other question was just around the RCMP additions. I don't see them in the service level changes budget, and I thought we had discussed adding RCMP members this year.
We have, through the mayor, we have added RCMP members. My understanding is that this is through a long-term agreement that has been reached between the district and the RCMP. And so the changes in the RCMP year to year are being viewed more as a non-discretionary adjustment that's part of the overall package, rather than a specific service level change that is identified individually or independently. So we acknowledge that the RCMP, that there were additional RCMP that have been added in, or requested, I should say, for 2024, and they have been included in this package, and they're phased in between 2024 and 2025.
So what line item would that be included in?
The additional RCMP costs would be included in the protective services costs. On this chart, I would suggest that you won't see the additional RCMP costs, because it is anticipated that the additional RCMP costs would be supported by external revenue sources. And so their net impact on the tax levy would be zero.
So if I'm looking in my package at page 15, are they in the 2024 labor and benefit contract increases?
No, they are not, because we do not pay the RCMP directly as part of our wages. They are a contract.
So where do I find the RCMP cost in our budget?
Through the mayor, the increase in the RCMP is shown as an increase in our protective services costs. What you are going to see in year 1, 2024, is 1/4 of 4 members, additional members. So a total of 1 additional RCMP. is being added to the protective services costs. And if you were to then look at the following year, and I think that that will be found on page 16. And if you were to look at the changes between 24 and 25, you would see a significant increase in protective services, and that would reflect the additional RCMP. You should also see an increase in fees and other revenues, and those additional other revenues are offsetting the additional RCMP costs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, council, other questions? I was going to do a check, see if anyone hasn't gone yet, but I'm not seeing that. So go to you, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. This is a question for my understanding. When we draw from reserves, obviously that we need to pay that back into the reserves over time to build it back up, right? Let me stop there. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, I would say yes in general. And the reason I say that is there are some reserves that have fairly high levels because we have already saved money for the purchase of an asset. So when we purchase that asset, we wouldn't necessarily be looking to replenish that cost in the short term because we had specifically saved to buy that asset. The drawdown was anticipated, and then we would start at this lower level and replenish the reserve over time. But otherwise, yeah, the general concept is quite correct. Thank you.
And so as we're making decisions, as council, as we make decisions about what funding to approve and what budget items to not approve, we often see coming from reserve. Do we as council have any way to understand whether or not that is money that we have saved or money that we will need to pay back?
Through the mayor, I think probably the best way to look at it is this. We have an asset management strategy which allows us to replenish our major reserves. That asset management strategy is designed to ensure that all reserves get replenished based on the assets that they support. So whether an item was directly intended to, sort of have the money come out and come back in rapidly is maybe more of a moot point at this stage. Now that we have a long-term plan to ensure that the reserves are rebuilt in a manner that will ensure their sustainability, we feel fairly comfortable that all reserves will be rebuilt in an appropriate time frame to allow us to manage our future assets.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the mayor. Just a further clarification on that point as well is we do provide in our package the reserve continuity schedules, which can show council the revenues coming in and how much is, so the revenues that we're storing into that reserve and how much is coming out. And as Mr. Russell had explained, the asset management takes that even longer look and really is building over time. And the asset management program, actually, I think the longest assets were around the 50-year mark. So it's building that over time. So it's not just this sort of year-to-year take and give sort of situation. It's more of like, okay, we need to build this to sustain our infrastructure over a longer period of time.
So this is more of a comment than a question. My concern, or the thing that I'm wrestling with, is as I see a lot of expenditure being designed as come from reserve, I don't know if that's money we've already saved or money we're going to need to pay back. And is a reasonable portion of the 10% per 9% per year increases that we're going to see over the next 5 years, how much of that is being generated or triggered by our tendency to pull from reserves, feeling like it's money we've already saved when it's perhaps not? That's that's not a question I think you can answer succinctly, but that's the thing I'm struggling with.
Let's see if there's any attempt to comment on that one, but no, that's
Through the mayor, I would
yeah, go
I
ahead.
would simply I would address it in this manner. The line that you see as asset management is our attempt to ensure that we provided for long-term savings to replenish the reserves. So that reflects our plan to ensure that the reserves get rebuilt. There may be other let's just say that's the long-term plan. If we found the need to, if we had to immediately replenish a reserve, we would bring that to council and recommend that.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Pettingill, then Stoner.
Yeah, just actually start off maybe with a comment responding to my colleague's last sort of question comment. And my personal perception is that historically there's been a bit more of a preference to rely on debt for big purchases, with the idea that the citizens that will be using whatever it is are the ones that pay for it. And I sense a bit of a transition, which personally I'm a little more comfortable with, where we're actually trying to plan ahead and save ahead, and we're sort of in that transition place. And I guess there's arguments either side, but I think we're sort of, from my perspective, moving away from that debt reliance and towards reserves more, for what it's worth. My question though is, we have a sense of where the utility fees we think they're going to go. I'm not clear on what assumptions we're making about other sorts of user fees, like permitting fees and, using various services fields and stuff at Brennan Park. Do we have a sense yet of where those might go over the next several years? Are we thinking sort of similar increases to what we're looking for our revenue requirement, or have we put our minds to that yet?
Through the mayor, I think staff are reviewing potential changes to cost recovery methodologies for things like Brennan Park, for areas like building inspections and engineering or development fees. And we haven't completed the necessary analysis to determine what the long-term pattern of rate increases will be coming forward or will be used. So I think that that's forthcoming in future years, but I don't believe that that's been included as part of the 24 through 28 financial plan at this point.
Okay, thanks. I sort of thought that might be the case. I guess what I'm trying to wrestle with is, we are looking at providing significant additional levels of service and moving towards saving more ahead. And if on top of that, we're also looking at having to significantly increase user fees, I'm just, trying to be a little bit cautious of that. But I guess that's something we'll just have to, keep in the back of our minds for now. See if my colleagues have any thoughts, but I'll leave my questions there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, picking up on Councillor Hamilton's questions about reserve replenishment. Our asset management plan really focuses on some of the core reserves, not all of our reserves. And so I think that's the other piece where I'm struggling, is that there are a number of reserves that are not in the reserve continuity schedule that we don't have visibility into. And so is it possible to identify which reserves, so where it identifies a line item being taken from reserve, which reserve it's being taken out of?
Through the mayor, that is doable, but it's not instant, let's say. There definitely will be a bit of work required for us to be able to address that. The reason being is that the way our system is currently set up, it identifies the funding sources reserve. It doesn't identify the specific reserve. So we would have to go in line by line to identify those. So that's why it's a little more problematic.
Okay.
Hold on one
And-
sec. I saw Ms. Boxford wanted to chime in on that one as well.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to add to that is that it's certainly a process improvement we can work towards. It unfortunately won't happen for the 24 to 28 financial plan. It is a significant amount of work to rein in all the provisions and reserves. For the most part, the reserves are taken care of. The provisions aren't, and they're both under that sort of area. So something we certainly will work towards as we improve our system, and there is opportunity there, but it won't be for this year.
Can we get visibility into the total amount in each of the reserves and provisions that are not included in the current reserve continuity schedule?
Through the chair, yes, we can.
That would be a helpful workaround for this year. And then my other question, I think, and this is what I was trying to get at a few weeks ago, and maybe I'll ask it in a more succinct way this time, maybe not. But as we look at the general fund, capital project funded service level maintenance items, they are all being funded by capital, but they will have a future tax implication. Kind of speaking to Andrew Hamilton's point, where it's like we are banking them for now, but we will have to pay them off eventually when we start to absorb that debt. So what is the tax implication of those positions in whatever year, 2026? How do we figure that out? Or are they accounted up here in terms of our debt servicing? And that would be great.
Through the chair, they're accounted up there through your debt servicing. They are not. That's why they have zero value or zero adjustment value with respect to service level change. They are added to the cost of the capital project. Capital project is funded through reserves and debt, let's say, and so either it's related to an adjustment to the reserve balance, or it's included in the debt servicing, one or the other.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see Councillor Pettingill. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to add to that as well, it's not just debt and reserves. It would be any of the funding for the capital projects. So if it was a grant funded project, if it was, any external sources, that's where it's the makeup of the capital project funding will pay for those folks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pettingill, you have your hand up electronically. Is that your okay? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just wondering if staff can remind me of what is the difference between a provision and a reserve?
Through the chair, a reserve is a bylaw regulated savings account. So there is a specific bylaw that says you put the money in for this reason and you can take the money out for those reasons. Whereas a provision is a council authorized savings account, which means it's not restricted by a specific bylaw. Council has simply directed staff to save money for this reason. So a good example would be, we have a library provision. So funding to the library that is in excess of what they use in the current year remains in a provision. It is not regulated by a bylaw. It is simply regulated by council directing staff to put it in the bylaw and save it for the library.
By resolution or motion.
Sorry, I'm getting extra notes here. I should say that the term reserve simply means that it's been that there has been a motion or a resolution made to sorry, I got that backwards. Provisions are created by motions or resolutions. Reserves are created by bylaws. That would be the defining characteristic.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to go to staff quickly and just ask about any or what other levels of presentation we have, or is this it and we're going to the structure? There's more. That's what I thought. I know there's lots. I just want to make sure that we're getting the right questions at the right time is what I'm trying to Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Okay, one other detailed question on service level changes. There's $20,000 in the budget for waste bins and porta potties in parks. I'm curious how many waste bins and porta potties that provides. It says one for Brennan Park and one for Smoke Bluffs Park, but there's already a porta potty in Smoke Bluffs Park. And I'm asking how many that actually provides out of curiosity of whether we were to increase that, if we could provide more waste bins and porta potties across more of our parks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, James Story, Director of Public Works. We've gotten requests for a number of additional porta potties at a number of different facilities. Right now, we're looking at across them about 5 of each. We could add to that, or we could subtract from it. But these cover all the requests from various organizations for additional ones, and in specific, they asked for an additional one at the Smoke Bluffs Park.
So from an operational perspective, we could add more.
Through the chair, if council wished to increase funding, we could certainly do so. There is a maintenance component, as the more that we have, the more we have to service them. So that would also have to be taken into consideration.
Okay, that's helpful. I will stew on that for a little bit. Thank you.
Actually, and on that point, these 5 additional, how many are in service now? Just so we understand how much of an increase we're looking at here. Just help me understand.
Through the chair, the only one that we put in, and we just only installed at the end of September, was an additional one at Brennan Park soccer fields.
But overall, how many do we have in are we maintaining at this point?
Well, you're talking about the total number of porta potties and garbage bins?
Yeah, we'll say porta potties at this point, because I know that.
I will have to get back to you on the exact figure. I don't want to quote that off the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to understand the sort of percentage increase that represents, if we're looking at doing more or less, or just understanding. That's where my question is coming from. Sorry, Councillor Stoner, I think I'm going to cut you off. Did you have another question? You're good. Councillor Greenlaw.
I just want to continue on this porta potty train. And when you come back with that number, could you also please clarify how many of them are seasonal, and when they are, what that season is when they're taken away? Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? Oh, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I can't resist the another question on porta potties. These numbers we're seeing, are they inclusive of the sort of operational costs and staffing and so on? So it's sort of, if we know that it's X per porta potty, we can just multiply that out by however many we'd like to see, or are there sort of additional staffing and other operational charges on top that we need to be thinking about?
This is through the chair, so yeah, good question. For the most part, they include the servicing of it. However, there will be a threshold when we get to a certain number of litter bins or porta potties. There will be additional, such as additional truck or staff to service it once we cross that line. Right now, we can absorb these with current equipment and seasonal staff.
Okay, seeing no other questions at this point, I'll turn it back to staff.
Through the mayor, we will continue. We're going to discuss special operating projects in this section. I wanted to highlight some projects that have a climate adaptation purpose. So we've highlighted some of them there. We also want to speak about some of the new projects that have been added. So these are some of the larger projects. Agri-Food Implementation Phase 2 and the Innovation Capacity Development are both economic development projects that are grant supported. There are significant grants associated with both of these projects. We have the wood fiber LNG, Fortis Eagle Mountain gas pipeline. That's a very long statement to try to make without stopping, which relates to capacity support provided by, a key industrial player in our district, and also the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund project, which relates to the federal government providing funding to municipalities to enhance their ability to accelerate the number of housing permits that they are able to manage. So these are some of the changes that have been recommended, or I should say requested by council. So the first one that we wanted to speak of here is with respect to special operating projects, is Parks and Rec Master Plan review. So within the Parks and Rec Master Plan review, this project was originally funded by CACs. Council asked staff to review that and recommend another potential funding source. What funding source that we would recommend would be tax. This project being an operating project is not eligible for capital funding or some of the major reserves. So tax will be the appropriate place to fund this from. We should also mention that this would currently, the cost is allocated $100,000 to 2024 and $20,000 to 2025. Staff would be willing to reallocate the costs for 24-25 if this project were to continue to 70-50 split between the 2 years. That would reduce the tax impact, or I shouldn't say reduce the tax impact. Tax impact will be the same total amount, $120,000. It would just be distributed over 2 years. It would reduce slightly the amount in 2024 and increase slightly the amount in 2025. That is a consideration that council has provided. Looking at this, the total $120,000 equals a 3% increase in overall taxation, and that equates to approximately $7 for the average household. And I'm going to pause here for questions on special operating projects and additional direction.
Thank you. On that delay in the reallocation piece, does that have any real impact on the delivery of, like, what impact would that have on the delivery of the project, timing wise, and just trying to understand what the knock-on effect of this would be besides just the allocation cost?
My understanding is that this project will take 2 years to complete and will not be finished until 2025. Staff believe that due to other requirements and staff capacity allocation, it's probably a more realistic timeframe is to split it 70-50 than 120.
Okay, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Can staff just remind us of what the urgency is around this project? We have existing recreation master plans that we're having a hard time figuring out how to implement for some of our core recreation facilities. And in addition to the Parks and Rec master plan, there are neighborhood parks plans in the 5-year plan that together total $400,000 over the next 5 years for parks planning. And I'm still unclear on the rationale behind this. So I'm just wondering if staff can speak to it.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Elaine Naseby, Parks Planner with the district. Our existing Parks and Rec Master Plan is dated in 2012, And since that time, our community has had a lot of change, changing priorities, a lot of growth. Our population has changed, our neighborhoods have changed. So we have done a lot of work at our central parks and recreational facility at Brennan Park. And the idea with the Parks, Rec and Culture plan is to bring in that good work into a broader plan that looks at all of the park planning across the district. Some of the really important urgency for it is that we are doing neighborhood planning work, and we want to ensure that our park acquisition guidelines are current, are getting us really good park and recreational land in these new neighborhood areas. We also want to capitalize on the development that's happening in our community. So can we have some satellite recreational facilities that are not at Brennan Park, but maybe are at the oceanfront or in other new developments? There are lots of reasons why it is urgent now, and those more distinct community and district level parks, so Junction Park, Rose Park, Smoke Bluffs, we have those. We do have those after the broader Parks, Rec and Culture plan. Those individual plans were recommended in 2012, and as our community is growing and we've got, again, that growth pressure specifically on the downtown area, regionally for Smoke Bluffs, and lots of neighborhood growth around Smoke Bluffs. So those are scheduled for after the broader Parks and Rec plan. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I think one of the challenges I have are things like waterfront and oceanfront have already been rezoned and negotiated. We know what's coming online. We know what the operations thereof, Garibaldi Springs. So there's lots of moving pieces, yes, but I would say that we've been quite successful in securing the things that our community needs through the major rezonings that have happened. I have another question around neighborhood area planning, and I'll follow up on that, but how that connects into neighborhood area planning and our intentions behind ongoing neighborhood area planning, I think, is something that we haven't resolved yet at this council table. And so to me, this just feels like it's moving too quickly. And I'm curious about the implications of delaying for a year to better understand how we would incorporate the various neighborhood parks plans and integration into the already challenging Brennan Parks and Fields Master Plan.
Through the chair, if I could respond, one of the issues, as you said, we have new parks coming online. Some of these major parks have not been anticipated in our Parks and Rec Master Plan. So we need to take stock of what has happened because we haven't followed exactly on the trajectory that I think our current master plan has laid out. It's over 10 years old now, so it's not a very useful plan at this point. The other rationale for doing it now is that the current master plan has a list of projects and some general cost estimates in it. We need to take stock of that list to make sure that it's still current, that the costs are current, because we are expecting regulatory changes coming down from the province on the way we collect some of the fees, like the community amenity contributions. So the next iteration of our CAC policy, whether it's a policy or a bylaw, is likely going to have to be based on some real cost estimates. And so doing this work now puts us in a better position to keep up with regulatory changes coming forward. In addition to just having a plan that takes stock of everything that has happened and anticipates the growth that we have seen, which we didn't anticipate in our current Parks Master Plan.
Through the mayor, just to add to that, we have been updating, and I know it's on our strategic plan to regularly update our master plans. And I know some of my colleagues here have really clear marching orders for what they're doing. Our Parks, Rec and Culture, our Parks and Rec plan from 2012, we have realized maybe half of the recommendations, but the priorities, emerging needs, those haven't been prioritized. Further, one of Council's strategic plan is to build our community capacity with community partnerships, and so some clearer direction in the parks and recreation world related to that. I know we're working on a partnership agreement, but part of it is so that when community groups come forward with proposals that we have direction to move forward with those.
You're good for now? Yeah. Councillor Hamilton.
On this Parks and Rec Master Plan review, this is a consultant-led project, is that correct?
Through the mayor, yes.
So the bulk of this budget line item is the payment to the consultant. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure I'll be able to say this succinctly. I've had sort of similar reservations about this same line item. And I guess a couple things that I'm struggling with when I look through our current 5-year plan and look at the special operating budget plans for ones that seem like they're likely to have knock-on expenses in future years, which haven't yet been accounted for in the 5-year plan. This one sticks out to me as the one most likely where there are future costs to actually execute on it, which we haven't yet planned for. And so I guess that's one, maybe I'll start there. Is that an accurate assessment, or are there other sort of plans in the special operating project that also have significant future year costs, which we haven't really estimated and included in the plan yet?
Through the mayor, just for clarification, is that specifically the Parks and Rec culture plan or all park planning projects?
I think I guess it might apply to all of them, but this one in particular, I guess what I'm looking for is, what are the line items, especially in special operating projects, which, even if we can manage it this year, actual following through on subsequent years, we haven't seen those costs yet. And so we may do the plan, but then not be able to execute it. So I'm really wondering, are we doing a little too much planning work this year? And, we can manage it this year, but we're going to struggle in future years. And so that's what I'm really trying to get some sense of is, are there a couple plans in this year's budget that we should actually pull because of the future year impacts? And is this sticks out to me as one of those ones that might have very significant future year impacts that we haven't seen yet, but that might be an incorrect assumption.
Through the mayor, it does allow us to capitalize on those external partners in terms of delivering parks and recreation. It just sort of streamlines that we do have a plan. As an example, when we had a budget for the Junction Park washrooms, that line item didn't necessarily include an overall design of the park to determine where those washrooms would go. I know my colleague Jonas Velnishkis mentioned having information that will feed into our future CAC, DCC parks project lists. Junction Park, I know we've got Sarah Morris here. It's so important for events and Squamish arts. And so really it gives us a roadmap for whether we can deliver them or our community partners can.
Okay, thank you. And just if I can dig into that piece, because I was going to ask how this relates to the fairly recent arts, culture, and heritage plan. From my understanding, there's a fair bit of stuff in that plan we could still execute on. And I guess I am a little bit worried that some of those things might take a back seat to new things in this plan. And so I'm just wondering if you can alleviate that concern or explain a bit better how these that existing plan and this new sort of review will relate?
Through the mayor, that's a really good question. And we did go back and forth on whether we would include culture in this plan. We're still drilling down the scope of how much culture will inform this plan, but for certain it means like events. So events that are happening in parks and recreation, the infrastructure required for that. And yeah, we will determine what further level of culture that means. Thank you.
You're okay for now, Councillor?
Yeah, I'll chew on that for a bit. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. I have a question and a comment at your discretion, Mayor Herford. Mr. Russell has suggested that there is some staff consideration that's taken place over this, a split, whether it's 100K 2024, 20K 2025, or whether we go for $70,000 next year and $50,000 the following. I wonder if staff may be able to elaborate on this. Are there real staff capacity or considerations behind this new to us today?
Through the mayor, I believe that we could do it either way. It is going to be a consultant-led project, so staff capacity, it will be reduced in terms of requirement for staff to lead the project. We think that the 70-50,000 split is a more realistic one. It gives us a little bit more runway to initiate the project, to get council's feedback on scoping, rather than jumping in with the biggest expenditure happening in 2024.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'd just like to offer an observation, just reflecting on my colleague's comments. Firstly, the Arts, Culture and Heritage Plan has been referred to. That plan outlines responsibilities for the district, distinct responsibilities relative to other agencies and the private sector, and we have not put together a work plan for that. Secondly, we have had issues come up in several developments, puzzles that have surfaced for district planning needs. For example, at Bailey Street, at the Waterfront Landing South Park discussion, we discussed public recreation related needs that we still need to sort through with the developer. We've got Brennan Park satellite facilities needs that Mr. Bragg has touched on last week. We have civic building discussions last year that touched on whether a gallery should be included or not, or these sorts of things. They have come up and will continue to. Recently, we've started through a consultant at Adventure Center precinct planning that touches on recreation and cultural needs there. So I'm convinced that this is an important roadmap sooner rather than later for our toolbox and for our negotiations and our own district facility planning, but negotiations in CAC proposals with developers and also with the SLRD. With their uses and their growth and their uses on our facilities, I'm convinced that this roadmap is essential, and I'm satisfied with Mr. Belanis's comment that maybe we do need to revisit some aspects of the work plan, and so the 70-50 split sounds reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. On this point, I appreciate the opportunity or that's been presented here to split it. Is there a reason that if council desired, we could use sort of a blended approach on the CACs, maybe a similar split to the 70-50 between CAC funding and taxation to achieve this?
Through the mayor, yes, council could. I think the question was whether or not CACs were considered an appropriate funding methodology in the first place.
No, that's, yeah, I understand that. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm getting this all the way. And okay, I've got some thoughts are forming here. I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Stoner and then Hamilton.
Slight deviation while Mr. Valeniskis is still sitting there. Neighborhood area planning. We still have line items for 2024 and 2025 of $30,000 for neighborhood area planning. I'm just curious where what our current thoughts are on continuing down the path of neighborhood planning, given our experiences and our lessons learned. And in particular, I've been reflecting a little bit that if we were going to continue down this path, if it's something that we would want to contract out as opposed to second our internal planners to do so. Not that they haven't been doing a fantastic job, but it is also a huge lift for our internal team. And so I'm just curious, those budget line items haven't shifted in the years that they've been in the budget. And so how are we reflecting or changing our approach to neighborhood area planning given where we're at?
Oh, sorry, through the chair. I'm going to speak to one part of that and then probably hand it back to Mr. Valeniskis. The first line item, well, the line item for 2024 is still specific to ongoing activities. Following the adoption of or the anticipated adoption of a Garibaldi Estates neighborhood plan, there are going to be several implementation actions required to address anticipated land use changes. And one of those steps will be to complete a water and sanitary sewer servicing model to identify specific upgrades required to accommodate those land uses. And that budget item for 2024 has been identified as the funding source for that work. Results from that study would be important to inform policy related to the equitable funding of those upgrades over time. So that's why it's sitting there for next year. The other aspect of your question is a bit broader, and I'm going to pass it back to.
Thank you. Through the mayor. So we using that line item as a placeholder for future neighborhood planning. And I believe the plan is to sort of go fully through the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood planning process and the implementation to determine whether this is the path we want to continue on or we need to shift it. Like I said, it's just a placeholder. That 30,000 is obviously not enough to do comprehensive neighborhood planning, but we will come back to council likely next year to reevaluate the approach.
Okay, that's helpful just to understand what the process and rationale is there, and look forward to that more in detail conversation in 2024 about how we continue to move forward. But happy to hear that there's some budget there in terms of the implementation of the work that we've done to date. My other question on this section of the budget was just curious if staff can speak to the rationale for investing in the council the council chamber cameras at this point in time, given that the system is functioning. Last time we tried to change it, it didn't work very well. And realistically, we will be shifting this room hopefully eventually in the medium term, at least. So just curious why that budget line item's in there.
Yeah, I can speak to that through the mayor, Conrad Correll, Director of IT. Essentially, we're just looking to connect the cameras to the new audio systems, which are also part of our new meeting system. Really, it's a piece of equipment and a little bit of work to make that connection and really provide a much better council meeting, virtual council meeting experience. That piece of equipment, if we do ever move to another location, we can certainly take that with us along with the cameras and any other equipment we have there.
Okay, I just want to further on that a little bit, because my experience in other committees and boardrooms is that when you actually do have hybrid or virtual meetings, having shared cameras within a room actually makes it really difficult to chair. You still need to ask people to turn on their individual cameras so that you can see who has their hands raised. So the system that we're using is actually, from my experience, one of the most functional through various forms of meetings, from everybody in person to hybrid to entirely virtual. And so again, if the system isn't broken, is there really a necessity to fix it?
Yeah, so through the chair, some of the feedback we've gotten is that it's not always been great. We're essentially using laptop cameras for council meetings, which is working, but some of the feedback we've received is it's not ideal. So we do have, I think it would be a better experience for councillors and for the public, but we can certainly work with council and with folks in the room to ensure that this solution meets their needs.
And
and
sorry,
we
can you
do a
just
trial.
clarify who that feedback is coming from?
It's kind of through random channels, so I don't have specific detail on that right now, but it's just what I've been more or less through the grapevine. I can certainly come back and find out exactly where that came from.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, back to the Parks and Rec master plan. I noticed, so on the slide, you say replace with tax, but in the budget, it says reserves. Is it currently where, so would taxation, does the 100,000 that's currently listed in the budget, is that currently coming from taxation and accounted for in the tax increases, or is it still under reserves?
Through the mayor. These requests are not incorporated into the plan. They've been brought back to this meeting for council to provide final deliberation and direction to staff, and then we will make the necessary adjustments. So in this instance, the reserve reflects CACs, and if council says, no, please change it, then tax will go up, reserve will go down.
Thank you.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just comment on the camera thing. I think I'd also be interested to know if this is driven by public commentary or council commentary. Personally, I also feel the system we have is the most functional that I've used in various venues. So if it's, the public really finds that this experience is not workable, that might be a reason to consider the camera upgrade from my perspective. But from a councillor perspective, I'd be a little bit uncertain about whether or not it would provide us as councillors with a better experience. And so, it would be useful to understand if this is the public driving this request. I want to come back to the Parks and Rec master plan. And from what I heard from staff, I think, and I just want to clarify, given some of my colleagues' comments, it sounds that this plan is really focused on parks, and there's obviously some overlap with Parks and Recreation, but it sounds like this is really about, to the degree arts and culture heritage, that plan overlaps. That's really in event space in parks. And then this is thinking about neighborhood planning in parks and CACs in parks and those sorts of things. So is it accurate to say this is really more a parks master plan review than a Parks and Rec overall plan review?
Through the mayor, we have done a lot of work at our Central Brennan Park Recreation Facility recently. So recreation will absolutely be a big part of this plan. But I would agree that it's the park piece that really needs the review.
So can I just get some clarification then? Like, because we do have so many grants in progress and capital works, and we have the field master plan, will this master plan review just reference all those existing things, or are we thinking to go out and ask sort of again and update what we want for fields and facilities at Brennan Park as well? Or is this really focused on, again, those all the other park stuff and reference the arts and culture heritage plan and so on, but it's not really updating those ones. It's really updating parks stuff.
Through the mayor, it is a holistic view of Parks and Recreation, and it will bring in the work that has been done.
Okay, and I don't want to belabor the point. I'm just trying to be very clear because I think in my mind, a lot of people when they've heard Parks and Rec master plan, people's minds typically go to Brennan Park and what do we want for Brennan Park, and so I'm just, in terms of managing everyone's expectations and so on, as we go to engagement, what pieces are we going to be engaging on? Is it mostly the parks piece, or are we really expecting to do engagement on what do you want to see at Brennan Park and what do you want to see in the arts and culture and heritage plan? I gather it's not that. It's really more, in terms of engagement, focused again on parks stuff.
Through the mayor, we are, as staff, absolutely alive to the amount of engagement that's been done with the community related to recreation at Brennan Park. And so we've been in touch with our communications team to develop a communication strategy to ensure that all these plans are very clear with their scope. So the real estate facilities master plan, arts, culture, and heritage, and the work that's been done at Brennan Park. I think, as Councillor Anderson said, there are a lot of initiatives across the community, and the idea is that this would tie them together with priorities and implementation, service delivery plan, whether particularly for recreation, is the district, which service delivery options do we have with our community having grown? There might be alternatives with partnerships where we're not maybe delivering it directly. Maybe it's indirectly or not at all. So I think that is what this plan will review.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, I'd like to put a motion on the floor to hopefully help advance this conversation. So I'm going to move that staff bring back the Parks and Rec master plan for consideration in the 2025 budget with further rationale, clearer scope, and understanding of the integration with neighborhood parks planning, arts and culture strategy, Brennan Park Rec master plan, and the Brennan Park Fields and Lands master plan. If it's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Councillor Hamilton, are you seconding that? Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair. I do think that this work is important, but I think we lack clarity on what it is that we're trying to achieve for it in the 2024 budget. And I don't feel comfortable moving forward the 5-year financial plan with $400,000 in master planning for parks, plus some neighborhood parks plans, while we already have ongoing work that where we're trying to figure out how to deliver with respect to Brennan Park Rec master plan, as well as the Brennan Park Lands and Fields master plan. And so there are too many moving pieces here for me to support this going into the 2024 budget at this time. Further hearing from staff that this is likely going to be a multi-year process, and more realistically, some of it would be done on the tail end of 2024. I think that this deserves a council conversation around what the scope is, how it integrates into our strategic plan. I hear staff saying that there's importance in trying to inform potentially future CAC and DCC work. I do hear that as well, but I also think that there is time before that gets implemented. And we do know that there are some critical priorities at the high end that I think we can come up with some good enough budgets for the year, and then better understand what it is that we're trying to achieve in 2025. To me, this feels incomplete at this point to be able to move it to taxation, and I am personally not supportive of paying for it through DC or through CAC funding. So that is why I put this motion on the floor, and I'll email it to you, Melissa.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Hamilton.
I'm in alignment with many of Councillor Stoner's thoughts on this. In addition, I'd like to actually, Councillor Pettingill brought in a piece of it that is powerful to me, is that I have concern that this master plan will develop a strategy that we will not have the funding to implement because of the relatively high projected increases in taxation over the next 5 years. I'm viewing it as we are going to be more and more challenged to implement our master plans as our funding gets tighter and tighter over the coming years. And I don't really see where the money's going to come from to implement the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the motion. I'll speak firstly to whether the issue of whether it might come from the CAC budget. And I think that there is good rationale for this. I think that it is one of the critical needs that has emerged in negotiations with developments and with developments that we can anticipate. What has not been touched on so much just in the recent comments is neighborhood hubs. This is a priority that is set, in fact, for some time now. I think that it's timely that we address what these neighborhood hubs, where they're going to be, what are they going to do. And it's not only recreational, it's cultural as well. And there'd be maybe a mix at different sites. One of those hubs may be Adventure Center Rose Park, and there's some new issues that have arisen there. I think that this initiative is overdue, and I'm not in favor of delaying it to 2025. We have current developments that are presenting issues, current district facility plans that are presenting issues, and we have recreation and cultural community organization needs that are longstanding opportunities as well that they would like to work with us on, speaking recently with a recreational group on this. So I think this is important engagement, an important public engagement, stakeholder engagement opportunity to undertake and get underway in 2024, and anxiously awaited by a number of groups in both recreation and cultural fields. Again, it's an important roadmap, and sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. Speaking at this point in favor of the motion for many of the reasons that have been spoken to my last colleague's comments, I agree that some of those considerations of neighborhood hub planning and so on are important. It's not clear to me, though, that this plan will sufficiently address that. I think that's part of the point of having a bit further conversation first, is to clarify as a council that we do or don't expect specific answers on those specific topics. And so I guess I would appreciate a bit further conversation to really make sure that we are comfortable that this is filling in the most important gaps between the plans we already have and where we want to go with the capacity we have going forward. And so I think having, digging into this a little bit more to scope it out, I think is important. Thank you.
Other comments? Go ahead, Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Through the chair, I'd also like to speak in support of the motion. I agree with many of the points that Councillor Anderson made, and I do agree this is a very important master plan for our community. But I also think it is something that could be pushed back 1 year just to have that clarification of how it fits in, and what we hope to accomplish with it. Thank you.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. And speaking in support of the motion, I'll add one more thought that I haven't heard from many of my colleagues. Where we're headed with this current budget is concerning for people who are on fixed incomes and are frightened by the type of overall increase that we're staring down. So I think that this is an opportunity to ease those concerns somewhat, while also taking a measured approach on this planning issue.
Thank you. I'm speaking against the motion. I think the something to remember here is that the master plans not only set out future investments, but are a guide for our staff to effectively and efficiently manage the current assets that we have as we go and consider the investment of our limited resources. I'd like to remind my council colleagues that we, under reliable service delivery, update and implement district's master plans to reinforce business continuity and long-term infrastructure resilience by September 2026 is a specific piece that I believe that this policy And this proposed master planning project aims to address. We also have, sorry, where's the other one? Also have the, it touches on a couple other priority areas as well. I think build relationships with community groups to increase community capacity and resources by September 2026, which has a specific date attached to it, I think feeds into this piece as well. So we're seeing a budget that's presented to us that does reflect our asks as a council through our strategic plan. And I think this is a key part of it. And I think that that we should move forward with it. The what future spends may come from it. It is a challenging piece. It doesn't mean if there's a major piece of work that needs doing, we need to see it so we can try to solve for it and know if we're deferring for that. Just not acknowledging that it's there doesn't move the community any closer to resolving whatever the issue is. But I do think that efficiently and effectively managing our current assets and the assets that are coming to us in the near term is important, and what I would expect the outcome of this plan to be. So I'm not in favor of removing it at this time, and I welcome a future discussion around how to effectively fund this work and whatever the recommendations may be going forward. And with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? And sorry, I got my camera back on. And opposed? Councillor Anderson and Mayor Herford opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. In the middle of that, I had Councillor Hamilton on my speakers list. I don't know if it was related to what we just did, but Councillor Stoner may have preempted that. I don't know, but that's where I was. So I'll go back there. Do you have anything at this point? I see Councillor French. I see your hand.
I can go on to the next item on my list.
Yeah,
whether it was the
yeah, that's whatever it was. Do what you want with your time.
A question, and I'm not sure if this is more of a project that I don't see as opposed to a project that I do see and have a question on. So I could be asking in the wrong section. We've seen, we had a conversation earlier, Mr. Valanaskas spoke about the Steep Slopes DPA and the funding for the Steep Slopes DPA as contingent on the CHF grant application. It seems to me like the Steep Slopes DPA is an important piece of our understanding how to deliver housing in our community. And I'd like to understand if there's a mechanism, and we're putting this important piece of our responsibility into the possibility of grant funding. Is there a mechanism to put it into the budget in a mechanism? So let me step back a second. Where do I see the Steep Slopes DPA in the budget, or do I not see it because it's in the CHF application?
Through the mayor, it is as part of the package of the CMHC half funding. There's some certain criteria to where the money can be applied to. So we looked for projects out of the list of projects that we were going to do to see what we could pivot under that fund.
Great. And if we don't get the DPA slopes funding from the CHF grant, will we be in a position to not be able to action that until it's budgeted for in 2025?
Through the mayor, if we don't, we were hoping that by now we would know whether the CMHC funding is allocated to Squamish or not. CMHC is taking a little longer than we expected to make that decision. So I believe that if we're not successful, we're going to have to look at whether any of the projects that we've included in CMHC fund have to come through from a different source through a budget amendment.
Okay. Is it possible, or what mechanism could we use to have funding accessible if the CHF funding does not come through? Is there a mechanism to put that in the budget?
Through the chair, I believe that the original funding proposal for this project was to be developer funded. And if it is not funded through the CMHC grant program, we could go back to bring forward a project that would be developer funded either in 2024 or 2025.
Councillor Hamilton, do you want to take a minute with that one, or
No, I'll just respond. So I will hope that the CMHC response comes in time for the spring amendment. So I don't know if this needs to be a motion or just a request. Could we request an update on the steep slopes DPA funding in time for the spring amendment, so that should we need to amend the budget at that time, we can do so?
And I'm going to add just a question to that before we get a reply. What was the expected time frame on a reply for that funding mechanism, the CMHC? Just so we all understand where and when the pieces are moving.
The initial announcement from CMHC was that it was going to be 6 to 8 weeks from the date of application, and we're at 8 weeks now, essentially.
Okay, so there's a chance that there's a strong likelihood that we would have that information by the time we go to the public with this, is staff's current understanding?
Staff haven't seen any updates from CMHC in terms of what the expectations are.
Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. CMHC is very far behind on reviewing the housing accelerator funds. They're still working through the biggest communities across the country. I saw MP Weiler on Friday, and he said it would be at least 2 months before we heard anything for towns, the communities of the size of Squamish. So we won't have a decision in time for this budget process, unfortunately. I did ask him if there was any way he could get us an answer for our budget process. Didn't seem likely.
Okay. Sorry, I had Councillor French next on my list, unless it was on this topic. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Question to staff. I wonder whether there is other avenues of funding, and what comes to mind is the real estate foundation. The goals of our local situation of Deep Slopes DPA might fit with their mandate, and I'm curious as to whether such alternative funding has been explored by other municipalities for this type of work. I guess we've only talked about the Housing Accelerator Fund, the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund, and a private developer. Are there other? I don't need an answer. I'd just like to put that out there and suggest that it deserves consideration, and maybe there is a real estate foundation conversation to be had, and maybe they may be able to point in other directions as well. Thank you.
Just for council, I think that that we should be careful around just getting into too many what ifs, and as I say that, I'm going to add an if. If we're not successful with the CMHC piece, there's a large amount of work that falls under that umbrella, and it will trigger need to trigger a conversation, likely many conversations with council, including but not limited to the steep slope piece. So I don't, unless folks feel that we need to make a specific motion on this piece around an update, which we would entertain motions that are put forward. But if we're not successful there, we've got a lot of rethinking to do. And if we're only partially successful, we even have some additional work to do there. So that unfortunately that's where we are. I don't want to spend too much time on too much speculation there at this point, if that makes sense to everybody. Okay, Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. And just looking at the boat launch item, there's $25,000 that's budgeted for 2024, and then no money after that. So it's me wondering if that $25,000 in the year ahead is a one and done scenario, or is the thought we just don't have any idea of amounts in the years afterwards, and the 25,000 just gets us started? Just dig a little deeper into that.
Through the mayor. So that is correct. It's a feasibility study. We don't know what to budget for at this point. We don't know if we need to budget for anything at this point as well. But we want to get a good idea of where a boat launch could be established, and then maybe look for opportunities that are necessarily require district funding to implement it. But it's a starting point.
Okay, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Stoner, and then I would like to give us a break before we talk the last. We've got an hour left on the clock for this, but I think that we've been at this for a little bit. We'll take a 5-minute break, but we'll go after Councillor Stoner's line of questioning here.
Okay, I do actually have a motion for council to consider on this item around the Housing Accelerator Fund. And the motion would be that council direct an additional $300,000 from the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund to the Squamish Community Housing Society in 2024, should the Housing Accelerator Fund application not be successful. And if it's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Seconded by Councillor French.
So council did receive a request from the Housing Society back in September on September 20th with their 2024 budget. That has been incorporated in consideration in our district budget through the Housing Accelerator Fund. One of the risks is, now that we know the timeline is still going to be a few months out, not knowing if we're going to be successful in that application, as it presents a fair bit of uncertainty for the Housing Society when they're trying to move forward some pretty substantive pieces of work, especially on pre-development work for potential housing sites. So in that email from the Housing Society includes details on what they plan on doing in 2024. And Sarah Ellis, the executive director, will be coming to council next week to provide an overview of the work that's ongoing and proposed for the coming year. But I would like to have this contingency in our budget that wouldn't affect taxation, starts to apply the community amenity contribution cash in lieu that we've received from developers to help us accelerate building affordable housing in our community. And again, it would just be a bit of an asterisk if the Housing Accelerator Fund is not successful.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. Speaking in favor of the motion, I think that this is a good backstop to create certainty for our housing society as they get themselves established and get their good work underway.
Any other comments on this? Go ahead, Councillor Greenlaw.
Sorry, I just had a question for clarification. If we allocate this $300,000 to it, can we kind of retroactively get that from CMHC? Yeah.
Yeah, so the motion is that we'd only apply the $300,000 from the Affordable Housing Reserve if the Housing Accelerator Fund application is not successful. So the primary option would be the Housing Accelerator Fund, the CMHC grant. If that application is not successful, then it would be the district's Affordable Housing Reserve that would cover that cost.
Thanks.
Councillor Hamilton.
I'd be, I know we're at a comment point, it's not a question point. I'd be interested in understanding whether we should, rather than making the decision now that is contingent on an outcome that we have no control over, I wonder if it would be better to bring this back to the spring amendment should the Housing Accelerator Fund not come through with the money for the Housing Society.
Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Through the chair, the risk there being that there's a potential 3 to 4 month lag between the 2023 and 2024 budget for the Housing Society, when that was intended to be a pretty critical time to be able to do some pre-application work on some potential sites. And so if we aren't able to move that money through the district in advance of our spring amendment, it could potentially delay some of the projects that they're proposing to come forward with.
I'm speaking in support of the motion. In general, I don't, if not this, then that is a challenge for me in this format. However, in this particular case, some certainty for our community partner doing very important work in our community makes a lot of sense to me. How that's reflected in the budget, I'll leave that to our wonderful staff to figure out how to do that. But I do think that this is a point of risk for that group that that shouldn't be, that is facing enough risk and challenges in setting out to do their work. So speaking in support. That I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And Council, we'll take a 5-minute break. We've been at this for a little bit. We'll come back and finish off our final hour here shortly. So back at 11:30. Thank you. All right, welcome back to the special business meeting for October 17th. And I will turn it over to staff to take us through the next slides.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council, general public. We're going to continue and we're going to speak about the 2024 through 2028 capital plan. So some of the highlights we wanted to mention to council is there are a number of climate adaptation and mitigation projects under the capital plan. And we have listed some of the larger ones here. In addition, we would like to outline some of the major capital projects that are underway or will be undertaken next year, just to remind council of, where the big ticket items are and the type of work that we're trying to get started or finished. And then there are a number of changes that have been made or recommended either by staff or by council with respect to the capital plan, and I'm going to go through some of those here. So, excuse me. Okay, I apologize. I have a slightly different page on mine. So nonetheless, council has requested that staff review some projects and bring back additional information. And of those projects, we would start with the indoor bike park utilities. This is a CAC funded project, and council has asked staff to review the CAC funding and perhaps propose an alternate method of funding that might be considered more appropriate. In this instance, if CAC funding were not available, staff would recommend funding this project through using the capital reserve. Second project that we will identify here under the council changes was Brenham Park Recreation Center electrification and utility connection and upgrades. This is a capital project that was identified with a total cost of approximately $1.5 million, and it was to be funded through CACs. Staff are now recommending that this project be deleted. I will give a more fuller explanation of the rationale for deleting this project in just a moment. The last project that council requested changes on was a paid parking implementation scoping project. And notation on that project has been included in your report and also an attachment to the report. It should be noted that the project itself has a $75,000 impact in 2024 and would obviously have future impacts for the capital components that may come out of this in 2025 and future years. The idea was for staff to come back with a report to council outlining how paid parking implementation may proceed. It should also be noted that the engineering group has identified has a heavy workload, let's say, and has identified the fact that if this project were to be added to their work plans, that they would request a project be removed from their work plan. The project they had identified was government road realignment. It should also be noted that there are accomplishment of this project has significant requirements for communications. Also, there would be a very significant communications component associated with this project. Lastly, staff have requested changes related to the following capital project: Brenham Park Recreation Center upgrade, Project 1. That's the Green and Inclusive Community Buildings Grant Program. And so originally this project has the grant-based project was funded to $16.3 million. That's the value of the grant. In July, our facilities and construction team came forward with a request to add $4.2 million to that project. That was an estimate for adjustments to the base project, and also to reflect the fact that there will be a number of other items that will be required at that site at that time to allow this project to go forward and meet all the requirements of the grant. Subsequent to that, we dove back into this and were able to determine that some of these components were included in the utility connection project, included some of the same components that were in the Brenham Park Rec Center upgrade project. So we've eliminated the overlap. We've deleted the utility project, included everything in one project. The total cost now is projected to be $21 million, and that would allow for both the grant funded components plus the additional work that would be required to allow us to meet the grant requirements. There were additional scopes of work that the grant recommended that we include to ensure that we meet their eligibility requirements. So that would bring the total cost to $21 million. The difference in there between the 16.3 and the 21 would be funded from the land reserve. So those are the projects that staff and council have requested additional information on for decision making. And I will pause at this point and turn it back to the chair for additional questions on the capital plan.
Thank you. Council questions? Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Appreciate the additional information on these particular items. On the indoor bike park utilities, I'm still unclear on the timing of this project and what is driving it in the 2024 budget. We haven't seen this come to council, and it wasn't in the most recent facilities quarterly update. And so I'm just curious why it's in here and what's driving it for the 2024 budget.
Through the chair. Yeah, this has been ongoing for some time, apparently pre-COVID when the work on this started. I couldn't speak to why this has been in there. What we're seeing right now, and that utility thing is a whole, there's someone who's interested in putting an indoor bike park in there. It's an opportunity for us. It is in the Brenham Park lands Brenham Park master plan. It is, to be fair, out of step. It's quicker than it's anticipated, but there was an opportunity there. So the utilities there is a hold in case they have a proponent who's willing to come in and do this largely on their own dollar. Our contribution to this would be the utilities. There's been no agreement with that person. The agreement would come before council, and that would be up to council to go ahead with that project or not based on the project that they put forward.
Okay. I see Mr. Bragg online, and do you have anything to add? Sorry, I'm not quite seeing everybody there, but
That's true, Chair. Mr. Stoner hit the main points there. There's one additional item here is that Mr. Stoner did state that this is not in sync with what our short, medium and long-term master planning is for Brenham Park. However, there is an opportunity because there is a proponent there. We also do have long-term planning to put in utilities in some areas of the lands. And what this does, it could be seen as a latecomers agreement that we could use in the future. But at some point, we do need to put some utilities to this area of the land. What with the proponent being in front of us now, is fast forwarding that a little bit. And this is an allowance of expected costs of what it'll cost to actually put these utilities in. So it's basically an allowance to put us in a position to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Is it possible to bring this forward as a budget amendment if the proponent, if the proponent does move forward and want to move forward, can this be a budget amendment as opposed to a budget allocation?
Through the chair, I'm going to refer back to Mr. Russell on a question for that one.
Through the chair, we were waiting for Mr. Bray. I will put it this way, through the mayor, to answer your question, Councillor Hamilton. The spring budget amendment is, sorry, let me phrase this slightly differently. We have a carry forward budget amendment, which occurs every spring. That is a requirement because we've moved our budget approval process up until December. And so we have no other mechanism to allow us to include projects that are still underway but not complete from the current year to be completed in a future year. The spring amendment per se is not an official fixture of our financial plan, and we would probably prefer not to do it if we had a choice. We try to restrict it to things that have been pushed upon us rather than contingent projects, if that helps to give you a bit of flavor towards staff's view of the spring amendment. We will use it. It is a tool at our disposal, but we would prefer to minimize the council's use of directing future changes to the spring amendment, if that's possible. So is this one where we could do that? Yeah, I guess it is. But by the sound of this, it sounds more that the project is contingent upon a proponent coming forward, in which case we would view this as a placeholder project and we could simply fund it. And if the project proceeds, we provide the utilities. If the project doesn't proceed, then it lapses and the utilities are never provided, rather than adjusting the budget at a future date to accommodate that.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Pettingill.
Yes, thanks. A couple of questions just on the utilities here. I assume this is referring to municipal utilities like water and sewer. Okay, and
Through the chair, it is exactly correct. Yes.
okay, and then with all the climate work we're doing, do we have any policy that would guide us in terms of engaging a proponent, whether or not we would be supportive of them building a large new facility heated by gas or that sort of thing? We're doing a lot of work to take that out of Brenham Park. And I realize it's a little bit of a tangent, but since we're talking about new utilities, is that the sort of thing that we would sort of not want to entertain with a new proponent?
Through the chair, all new construction, we try to electrify. We haven't put any new gas items in any of the new construction so far, and we aim to electrify the buildings. In particular, this one, we're aiming to electrify.
Okay, thank you. And then just so I'm clear on the electrification project, and we're sort of moving things around. Am I correct in understanding that we're not, at the end of the day, cutting any of the work? We're just sort of changing under which project and it occurs in the funding sources.
Through the chair. Sorry, Councillor Pettingale, can you confirm that question? I just want clarification of the question here.
Yes, sorry. We passed a resolution last week, I think, to remove the CAC funding, find an alternative to CAC funding for the Brennan Park Recreation Center electrification, the utility connection upgrades. As I understand, staff have decided that can be part of existing work. And there's a mention of, there's been other cost increases with some of that work. So we're looking to the land reserve to fund sort of this piece and some of the other things, but we're basically moving the work into different projects, changing funding and increasing funding for multiple reasons. But we're not actually, as a result of council's resolution, pulling back and doing less electrification. Is that correct?
Through the chair. Very simple answer is yes, you've hit the nail on the head, correct.
Okay, thanks. And then the last piece, with I guess, as I understand it, an extra 4.2 million coming from our land reserve, are we still in good shape there, or are we getting pretty tight, or are there any red flags with that increased amount coming from the land reserve at this point in time?
Through the mayor, we've included a reserve continuity schedule in the package. I'm not sure the exact page, it's towards the back. In that reserve continuity package schedule, I should say, we're showing projected land sales, or I should say additions to the land reserve. Let me rephrase that slightly. Of $16 million in 2024 and a further $12 million in 2025. Without diving into the details of things that normally are not discussed in public, i.e. land sales, let's just suffice to say that I think it's a reasonable understanding that council has and has knowledge of the first one. And the second one simply is that we recognize that for us to achieve our goals and meet the requirements of our capital plan, there will be a need for us to dispose of assets. And so we're recognizing that within the financial plan.
It's page 124 of your package, Councillor Pettingill.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, council, other questions at this point? Councillor Stoner, you look like you're halfway there. Go ahead.
I was expecting more people to have more questions. Appreciate engineering's efforts to identify what would have to come off the work plan to advance the paid parking implementation strategy in 2024. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to, are there time sensitivity risks to delaying the government road work that was scheduled for 2024? Would it put us at risk of not being able to secure specific grants? I know that there's a big kind of funding hole to actually be able to implement that project. So I'm just curious how big of an impact that has in terms of a 1-year delay.
Thank you for the question. I'm Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering, through the chair. What we tried to lay out was where it's at within our engineering and operational priority list. When we get down to number 3, you can see that that's where the strategic piece really comes in and where we're hoping for some guidance from council on that. As far as delaying, we've already actually delayed that project a year because we haven't had staff capacity to deliver the pre-design in 2023. With the new position, Manager of Transportation, to fill a vacancy within the department, we're hoping that person can take on this project in 2024. As far as risks, the government road capital project is of a larger scale than paid parking implementation. I think that fact alone means it's the higher potential for cost escalation, given it's a larger scale project. That's a detail I can probably provide at this stage, given we haven't completed the pre-design yet. So the pre-design was really the scoping exercise for what that ultimate capital project will encompass.
Given that paid parking is expected to have a revenue almost immediately once it's implemented, can we capitalize the cost of adding somebody to engineering to implement it?
I think I could, through the mayor, could probably speak to the scoping exercise we're going to undertake to pull forward some of the implementation. We've got that evaluation of delivery model as the big chunk of that work in 2024 to bring forward that implementation. That's when we'll be looking at the delivery model, tech options, the governance model. And I think we'll have a better understanding of our revenue once we've got into the meat of that project to determine the cost. So I don't know exactly at this stage where it sits or how guaranteed that is, given we're not yet into the details of it. As far as the capitalization of staff to deliver it, in 2024, it's a special operating project, not a capital project. And I'd probably lean to finance to comment on that. But in the 2024 work plan, as far as our projects, we're looking at the one staff member who's going to be overseeing transportation projects, and that's just where it sits for us capacity wise. But hoping obviously for council to give us that strategic direction.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Boxford.
Thank you through the chair. And that's a great question regarding the capitalization. The way it would work, as Ms. Bailey intimated, is that we do actually have to have a capital project established in order to fund any staff member through a capital project. So we're not quite there yet. It's definitely consideration, and it would be part of that scoping and analysis exercise.
That's helpful. You see how I'm catching on to how you're starting to capitalize project or service level changes though?
Okay, are you good for now? For now? Thank you. I have Councillor Pettingill in Hamilton.
Yeah, just one thing I didn't want to miss the opportunity to comment, and I really appreciate the detail we got on the parking and paid parking and what we would expect to sort of achieve in 2024 if we move it forward. The one piece that just stuck out to me on this piece of revenue is it talks about revenue neutral parking permits possibly, and I just want to highlight, and I know now's not the time to get into it, but for me the revenue neutral piece is a bit of an assumption. I don't think we've had that discussion yet, and maybe that's where we end up, but I just wanted to flag that. I think that for me is still a discussion point.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. I wasn't sure if anyone wanted to reply to that or.
Sure, I can reply. Yeah, I would agree. These are assumptions at the moment where this is very early days on the scoping exercise, and for sure there'll be many more discussions on this. You can see we've got 2 council touch points in the proposed scoping exercise. So by no means is this final. Is kind of our best guess at this stage what we could pull together.
Are you good for now, Councillor Pettingill? Okay, I'll go to Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Are we just talking about changes to the capital projects proposed right now, or are we now open to questions on all capital projects? Just a clarification on where we are.
Well, I'll go to staff for their preference, and then we'll.
Thank you for the question through the chair. The latter, it can be open to all at this point.
Great. So the Brennan Park concession, I see we've got 300,000 allocated this year and 2.5 million allocated next year. Could we have that's a much larger scope than I had, a much larger price tag, shall we say, than I had envisioned for what this is, and perhaps I have a different vision of maybe my vision was incorrect. Could we have a short recap on what the Brennan Park concession project is?
Through the chair, sorry, Cal Bragg here. It's a building that requires to service concessions. Also, parks admin staff are using it. It's also an existing public bathroom, washrooms. And we've also got the splash park coming in, which may need to use it as a mechanical room as well. So Right now, it's a combination of many items, and this is part of the master planning, and we're all bringing it together. In the next 3 to 4 months, we'll have an exact scope of work of what that building will be. At the moment, we know that it could be a combination of 3 or 4 things, which is why I've allocated the budgets accordingly.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you. On the on this, back to this sort of the utilities to this indoor bike park, which I've only seen referenced as indoor recreation as a rough placeholder in other documents, but the rationale for the CAC funding there originally, and just what the impact would be to fund it through this other, should we proceed with it to at this point to fund it through the capital reserve? I'm trying to get into the understanding the decision criteria that you're using in the original recommendation.
So through the mayor, the original recommendation was to fund this item with CACs. What we were attempting to do was we saw a number of additional projects being presented at Brenham Park, both in 2023 and into 2024 and 2025 as capital plan items. And at that point in time last year, we made a decision to use CAC funding or allocate the available CAC funding at that time toward support of additional capital expenditures at Brenham Park. And so we're basically trying to say, we've identified additional works required at Brenham Park. Let's try to fund those using the CACs that we've currently collected. The other thing that should be mentioned here is that in this specific instance, the amount that's being reduced is in CACs, or the amount that have been identified in CACs is $150,000 that would remain in the CAC bucket, let's say, and capital reserve will go down by the equivalent. In fairness, both of those reserves have probably well over $2 million at the end of 2024 is the projection. So it's not going to significantly impact the balance. The other thing that's key to keep in mind is that by identifying the fact that we had a duplicate project, so to speak, we were able to reduce the CAC draw by approximately 1.5 million by removing the electrification project. So the pressures that would have been placed upon the CAC reserves earlier have been somewhat alleviated. So, I mean, at this stage, if you think it's fair and warranted that it remain as CACs as part of a global push to fund work at Brenham Park under CACs, that's reasonable. If, as Councillor Stoner had proposed previously, that CACs should be used more so for amenities rather than for basic work that the district itself should be responsible for, such as the installation of utilities, well, that would be reasonable also, and we would use the capital reserve to fund it. And as Mr. Bragg had said previously, this is really a placeholder project in the case that a third party comes forward with a proposal to build an indoor bike park. If the indoor bike park doesn't come forward, we don't spend the money.
Thank you. I'm going to venture a motion at this point, which is that the indoor bike park utilities capital project be funded through capital reserve, and I'll speak to it if it's seconded by Councillor Hamilton. I think it's important to put us in a position as a municipality to capitalize on opportunities that as they present themselves. And so I think that keeping this in is crucial, and recognizing that it is a placeholder should another piece sort of fall into place. I do think that the capital reserve is the appropriate place for this. in my mind, the community amenity contributions, I prefer to get them into the community as sort of as early as possible, but as true amenities. And sometimes I could maybe stretch to having it as a planning for amenities. This is important work to actually realize amenities. But in this case, the opportunity would be through a third party, which, not knowing their pricing and how they're delivering their programming, I'm having a hard time viewing that as an amenity sort of in that category. So that's my personal justification for this alternative funding source as recommended. So thank you for staff for doing the work to figure a way through this. Other comments? I see Councillor Pettingill, your hand's up.
Yeah, just a process clarification. My understanding is that these changes here are already in what's before us today. So if we vote on, the current support, the current proposal, then all of these things, including what you've just asked for, go through. And it's just if we disagreed with these changes that have been made.
Yeah, thank you for seeking the clarity. I'll go to staff for a point of clarification.
Through the mayor, the items that staff have recommended are included in the plan. The items that council has requested, the changes that council has requested, are not included in the plan. We've brought those back to you. We've shown you how we would incorporate them if that is the desire of council. And we anticipate that you will provide direction today as to whether or not you want to make the changes that have been proposed. So, Mary, you were correct in that. No, right now, this funding is shown as CAC, and we would change it to capital reserve if this motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, or did I see your hand? Any other comments on this? So with that, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Trying to cross some things off the list here, team. Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
I'll put forward another motion that the Brennan Park Recreation Electrification Update Project upgrade project be deleted and incorporated into the Brennan Park Recreation upgrade. That one's already been done.
So that one's been done.
that
Just to
one
go to staff.
There we go. That the scope of the paid parking. So then, thank you. I'll make a different motion. Thank you. That the scope of the paid parking implementation be incorporated in 2024.
Is there a seconder for that? Go ahead, Councillor Stoner. Would you like to speak to it?
I think that moving forward with paid parking implementation has a lot of advantages within our community. I recognize that we are going to want to do this carefully and we're going to want to do this properly. I do acknowledge the impact it's going to have on both engineering and on communication. But I do believe it's an important project to start moving forward with, and I do believe it will solve many of our community's concerns that we hear a lot about. Thanks.
Thank you. Other comments on this? I'll venture my own. I think we have heard from some members of our community that the way we're doing things and the way things are working in downtown aren't working, and leave room for improvement. And that some of those voices have been consistent for a long time. So I do think it's time that we move forward with some action on this particular piece, and look forward to seeing those steps. So thank you to my colleague for bringing this forward. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. I'll go back to staff at this point.
Thank you very much, Mayor Herford. We will continue. We've made pretty good progress. We're almost there. The last section we would like to speak about is utility fund and highlights to the utility fund. There are two items that we're bringing forward for council today. The first is a request by staff to increase the minimum charge for depositing waste at the landfill from $5 per load to $8 per load. And this relates to any load of garbage that's under 20 kilograms in weight, and would bring these fees in line with the cost of collecting the money, depositing the money in the landfill, and you know, covering it, etc. We've looked at this, and the rate that, sorry, this rate increase would bring our rates into alignment with the rates of the minimum rates of other organizations in this area. And we think that that's an appropriate thing for us to do. So that's one item that we wanted to highlight. And second item we wanted to highlight, excuse me, is there was a council request for staff to bring back an alternate funding mechanism proposal for solid waste totes. And I'm gonna go like this quickly, and we'll go to the second slide in the presentation. This is the alternate proposal, the alternate rate proposal, where you can see in the center of the screen, the small garbage tote, the price is held at $210 year to year, and there's no increase. This would result in an increase, would result in an increase of $25 for the medium from $385 to $410, and a $40 increase in the large. And as you can see, the resulting percentage increases would be 6.5 and 7. The other comment I would like to make is with respect to this is this is year 4, 2024 is year 4 of a 5-year program that staff have put forward to adjust the residential rates, the rates for residential totes. Okay, and I'll come back to that and explain that a little more fully. So after this increase, if the alternate proposal were to take place, we would be seeing 0% change in the small tote for this year, and a $10 change over the past 4 years, including 2024. And for the medium tote, we would see a $25 increase in 2024, and an $85 increase over the 4 years. And for the large totes, we would see a $40 increase in 2024, and an increase of $130 overall for the 4-year period. So, you know, there have been some questions as to subsidized value of the small tote. And so what we would like, the comment that staff would like to make is, it was within our plan to continue a subsidization of the small tote size, or I shouldn't say necessarily a subsidization, but simply increasing the amount of the small tote less. So I'm going to go back to the original proposal for just a moment. And what I'm going to outline here is, in 2021, staff brought forward a proposal that would, over 5 years, increase the small tote by $5 a year over 5 years, which was 25% of the rate from $200 to $250. Because at that point, it was determined that we needed a 25% increase in rates in solid waste to allow us to manage the additional cost of the vertical wall at the landfill. Okay. So at that time, the proposal was $10 a year for small totes, $20 a year for medium totes, and $30 a year for large totes. So that was the original plan. And this is the alternate that council has asked us to bring forward and present for discussion. And as I have pointed out, staff believes that the original staying with the $10 increase provides a fair and equitable methodology for ensuring that all contributors to the landfill are paying a reasonable share, and it still maintains a significant differential in cost between a small tote and a medium tote and a large tote, which we believe would incentivize people to move to a small tote if they so desired and it worked for them. So with that, I'm going to pause because this is the specific question you've asked us to address with respect to utilities. And I'll turn it back to the mayor and back to you.
Yeah, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for all the detail on the tote question. With regard to the original plan to be incentivizing residents to move towards small totes, I assume one of the performance indicators, one of the indicators of success of that plan is the number of folks that have moved to small totes. Do we have any sense of how many have moved to small totes in the time? Whether our changes have been successful in achieving our outcomes is my question. Achieving our desires.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Shannon White. I'm the Integrated Solid Waste Specialist at the District of Squamish. It's an excellent question about metrics and how do we, measure success in this instance. Unfortunately, staff don't have the level of detail related to tote requests and the changes over time. What I can tell you is that in the 2019 to 2023, the medium tote subscription has decreased by 8%, and we have seen an increase in the small tote subscription by 38%. However, those statistics also include the growth of our community, new developments. We're unable to pull that type of level of information out of it. So those are, I would say, broad brush strokes of what's happening, not exact science.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just on this topic, I mean, I think the number in a perfect world that we'd really like to know is not just how many people are switching from medium to small, but for the people, what was, for someone that with a medium, how much garbage did they use? And when they switched to a small, what was the change, if any, in the amount of weekly garbage? And I'm just wondering if there's anything we could do in the future to start and collect that. Like, does GFL have the ability to track address and weight of bin and know what sort of bin each property had? Is that something we could sort of ask them to do, even if there was an additional fee, or that's just sort of beyond our near to medium term capacity to collect that sort of data?
Thank you. Through the mayor. I believe that GFL does have, may have some of that data. However, there would be a cost associated, and there would have to be council directive to go to that level of detail and explore that with additional cost.
Sorry, Councillor Pettingill, you seem to have muted yourself.
Sorry, I'm confusing my mute and hand buttons. Do we have an order of magnitude of that cost? Like, is that a $5,000 ask, or is that a $50,000 ask, or do we know or have any sense?
Thank you. Through the mayor. At this point in time, we do not have any cost estimates for this level of work. Staff can find that out. I think that staff would also require direction on what kind of this could be as big or as small as level of information we would like. So yeah, there'd just be a few more details that would need to be fleshed out.
Okay, I'll just for myself, I would like to know, because I think this is going to keep on coming up every time we're asked about these utility rates. And so if there's any way to get that information, is the amount of household garbage, does it change as tote size changes? Be really wonderful to know that. So to have some just high level sense of what it would cost to find that out would be useful in the future. That maybe doesn't help us with the immediate question of the rates for this year, but understanding the cost of getting that data would be helpful at some point. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Stoner and then Hamilton.
Yeah, I just am trying to think through how this data would actually be useful. And I think one of the challenges is it doesn't actually present like per capita generation of waste. So there might be 6 people in one household with a medium-sized tote, and there might be 1 person in another household with a small tote, but they're actually producing twice as much waste as their neighbors with 6 people in one household. And so I don't think we can get that level of data from GFL. And so maybe this is a question back to my council colleague. We have the overall like waste generation per capita that we get in terms of our waste diversion studies that we do on a very regular basis. How does that additional information on that individual household level help you inform your decision making, given that it doesn't give us any sort of indication around like per capita production of waste?
So if I can respond?
Yep, go ahead, Councillor Finnegan.
Yeah, thanks. So my assumption, or I guess my question is, can we figure that out per capita? I mean, I know how I would approach it. I'm not sure if those systems are feasibly in place to understand when someone changes from tote size on a per capita basis, is there a meaningful change in their actual weekly garbage production? And that's what I'm interested in. What is the cost to figure that out? Can we do that? And that would be, again, for a future year, but understanding, is there a feasible, cost-effective way to do that? Is that a $5,000 or $50,000 thing? And then we can go from there. But I would agree, if we're just dealing with sort of averages for medium and small, that's not going to help us. But understanding that change at a particular household when they go from medium to small, that's what I'd like to know, if we can find that out.
Okay. I think we'll all digest that. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. I'm going to put forward a motion that the alternative proposal for residential tote charges that keep the small totes at $210 and increase the medium and large totes by 6.5% and 6.7% respectively be adopted.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Oh, second by Councillor Greenlaw. Thank you. Would you like to speak to it?
I think that I'm encouraged by the decrease in medium totes by 8% and the increase in small totes by 38%. I understand that that's the information we can have, because there's a lot of confounding factors coming at play here. And I absolutely respect that staff had a plan to move things. I believe that we can move things faster here. And this is, in my view, a gentle way to move things, to continue moving things faster towards residents taking responsibility for using less waste, producing less waste.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, I won't be supporting the motion on the floor. I don't think that this is an equitable approach. I appreciate the reasons why we did it for the first few years. And I think hopefully it has resulted in some folks changing to small totes. The reality is that we have a baseline cost that we need to cover for our solid waste utility, and everybody has to bear the burden of that a little bit. And as we continue to escalate the differences between the small, medium, and large totes, as I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily proportional to or equitable on who it is that you're impacting. If you have a family of 5 that has a medium tote versus one person in a single household who has a small tote, their per capita waste production is not being differentiated on cost here. So I think we potentially start to unintentionally impact families, folks who are living in multi-generational homes, folks who are living in shared accommodations. The difference in the original proposal that staff brought forward already saw $185 difference between the small and medium tote, and even more than that between the small and large tote. And I think that if that in itself is not a large enough financial driver to shift people to a small tote, then the continued exacerbation of that, I don't think is going to drive it either. I think we need to find other mechanisms that are more equitable in their way of trying to encourage people to produce less waste.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. I won't be supporting the motion. The staff perspective on this is treating it more like a marathon, bigger picture. This is trying to sprint in the middle of a marathon. And I think in this case, we need to keep our eye on the long-term plan, the bigger picture, and to shift in the way that's proposed doesn't quite fit my bigger picture vision for how we're dealing with this and where we're going with it.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Pettingill, then Anderson.
Yeah, I'm still a bit torn. I'm going to take a few more seconds to decide how to vote. I guess we have for several years now elected to keep the small tote increases at zero or much lower than the other ones to really try and incentivize that push to small on the assumption that that would actually translate into less garbage, because it's not really tote size we care about, it's the amount of garbage. And maybe where we need to head to is actually weighing the garbage that you deposit each week, regardless of your tote size, and billing you that way. That's future discussion, but I guess I'm not totally sure that continuing to differentiate is really at this point doing much to reduce the overall garbage. And I think we do want a distance. We do want people to understand the cost of the garbage they produce, and I guess I'm not sure this proposed resolution helps with that above and beyond what we've already done. So that's what I'm debating with right now internally. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I will also not be supporting the motion. I share Councillor Stoner's observations that she's recited. I think that there are higher priority strategic initiatives for us to pursue to influence household waste management, and not least the sorting of organics and recyclables. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the motion. I think over time we need to get to pull these back into alignment as to how much waste the household is putting out, rather than simply which size bin it's going into. I know that's a proxy, but we need to look at that overall cost recovery. And at some point, this gets really far out of whack. And I think that we're on the verge of doing that if without good data to back up these actions. So I'm comfortable that what was proposed originally goes a reasonable distance to achieve similar goals. So I think that's so I won't be supporting. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? So we've got Councillor French, Stoner, Mayor Herford, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Greenlaw, and Councillor Pettingill oppose. Motion fails. Thank you. I'll go back to staff. Do you have any more next items for us? Or into general discussion?
At this point, we're going to go into general discussion. I'm just going to provide a quick wrap, and then we'll get into general discussion. Thank you and welcome back. So here's the summary of all the changes that we've looked at so far, and I will try to so to speak, give a thumbs up, thumbs down on where we are with these. So to assist, these are the staff recommended changes. I should point out that the staff recommended changes have been incorporated with the possible exception of the landfill minimum charge, in that that would result in a minor increase in the overall revenue stream of the utility, and that has not been adjusted yet. Okay. The other items, the coordinator has been added. The revenue has been adjusted to full year. The one project has been deleted. The other project has been increased at Brenham Park. So that's a overall net change in the capital budget of a reduction of $1 million. Okay. With respect to the changes that council requested staff to bring back for further council deliberation and decision making, they are outlined here. Their review of solid waste rates, council provided direction on. Council has provided direction on the indoor bike park amenities. They've provided direction on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. They've agreed to the deletion of a project that was doubled up, and they've provided a direction on the parking implementation in 2024. So that's a summary of the changes that were presented in this report. And we're going back to a discussion or feedback at this point. So this is, we've put forward what we've wanted. You've basically answered the questions we've asked, and now it's kind of back to council to wrap it up, I guess, is however you want to word it.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Do you require a motion for the change in the minimum landfill fee from $5 to $8? Do you require a motion for that, or is that already assumed?
Through the mayor, you could provide us with a motion for that. One. Two, I should also note that I was, when I said you should wrap it up, I do apologize. There is a motion, or sorry, there is a resolution included in the report, and council should review that resolution and address that also.
That was implied in your wrap it up in my mind anyways. Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton. I feel like you've got a follow-up.
Yeah, so then I'll put a motion on the floor that council that staff implement the recommended increase in minimum landfill charge from $5 to $8.
Thank you. I'll second that. Would you like to speak to it? Nope. Seeing no one's hands jumping up here, this seems absolutely appropriate, and I think I appreciate the eye to sort of where things fit in nearby jurisdictions, and it just makes a lot of sense to me. I always felt low when I got the $5 charge at the landfill. I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
I have a few straggler motions that I'd like council to consider.
Go ahead.
All right. My first one is that staff be directed to bring back costs for adding porta potties to at least one major neighborhood park in each neighborhood. And I'll speak to it if it's seconded. Seconded
by Councillor Greenlaw. Go ahead.
I appreciate that this is a bit late in the game to be asking staff to bring this back. But I did hear from staff today that there is operational capacity to add more porta potties across some of our neighborhood parks. And this is something that I hear from community of all ages with small children who are pooping in parks to older folks who really have bladder incontinence and need porta potties in more areas of our community. And so I would appreciate staff to come back and give us a bit of an insight as to what the cost would be to have more accessible washrooms across our community.
Do Do you want to, anyone, sorry, Councillor Pettingill, you want to speak to this?
No, sorry. Have questions for after we're done these resolutions from Councillor Stoner.
Okay, thank you. I'll speak in favor of the motion, although I recognize that perhaps what's proposed is achieving that with the 5 additionals, with not knowing the details on where they are or what percentage increase the 5 that are committed to represent. But I'm supportive of those goals, and I'm open to hearing that that's in fact what is proposed. But we were asked those questions earlier and didn't have sufficient, really the sufficient answers. So I think this better outlines what it is that we're hoping is achieved. So I'll be supporting the motion. Councillor Greenlaw.
I also wanted to speak in favor of the motion. I also hear a lot, especially from generally mothers of young children who are sometimes falling under that incontinent umbrella as well, and often have infants strapped to their stomachs when they have to use bushes in the wintertime. So I think this is an important motion. I also hope that it's a stepping stone to some more permanent facilities in some of these parks, because it is, you know, less hygienic. If you've ever had a child in a porta potty, it's a little scary. But I do think this is a really important step forward, and I'd like to speak in favor of it. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carry, or any opposed? No, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
My other motion is that the council chamber camera integration line item S2 630002 be removed from the special operating project budget.
Councillor Greenlaw is seconding that. Go ahead. Would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, as I spoke to in our discussion earlier, I think that the system that we have is working. And for me, I don't want to poke the bear if it is working for us. If I have heard differently, or if staff come forward and say that there's actually been issues from folks who have been watching recordings or are trying to join in online who are having a hard time, then I'd maybe feel differently. But for me, I think the system, from what I can gather from my council colleagues, is working well. And I would rather not spend some money on updating a system at this point that doesn't need updating.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. The audiovisual nerd in me wants to oppose this. The nickel and dime, tax saving, watching out for seniors' budgets. Part of me says this is one area that can save us a little bit of money. So I think that it's not absolutely needed at this point, and I will be supporting this one.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I guess my one hesitation here, I wonder if it's better just to ask staff to provide confirmation of what the feedback we're getting is, because if it's a perception that this is council being unhappy, I think it makes sense to pull this. If we have received significant feedback from the public, then maybe this is worth considering keeping in. It's not clear to me that the public has said that. I haven't personally heard that, and so I just wonder if it's better to ask for that confirmation of who is making these commentary before we pull it. Sort of put that out to my colleagues.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? I'm going to speak in support of the motion. I think that having experienced a few different formats, including rooms that have cameras that quote unquote work, this has been the most efficient space to work in our current system. It does pain me when I see an asset that's not put into action. As I sit here, I can see these cameras that we've had installed in this space, but with the accelerated learning that we all had to do around COVID, this was one of the lessons learned is how to make our meetings work and how to make this room work. And from my perspective, spending a lot of time in the chair seat, this is the format that works best. I'm curious to hear from our community and from our IT department where those comments or where that impetus has come from, and perhaps this could be included in a future year's budget. But without that information in front of us here, I don't see a strong enough case to keep it in. So I'll be voting in support. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And, oh, go ahead. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if staff can speak to the choice of the November 15th date for the public engagement session and if there's flexibility on that. Mostly I'm thinking of doing it on the Tuesday, November 14th. Right now our agenda planner is quite light, and I think it would definitely facilitate my schedule a little bit better. I appreciate Christina's not in the room, so I just wonder if maybe we can move the motion without that specific date, or if we need the specific date for the public information meeting to be included in the motion.
One of the considerations just in arriving in this general week that it's in is that Councillor Greenlaw and I will both be away for the trip to Shimizu. And so that leaves that week. Now staff can speak to the difference between running this on a Tuesday versus is it Tuesday and Wednesday? That's the question at hand, and perhaps any facility concerns or any other factors that we should know about as we contemplate that specific date.
Thank you for the question through the chair. I think we need to speak to Ms. Morit before we commit either way. I think there might be some facility constraints possibly as well, but we'll certainly bring that forward and ask her to make that consideration.
So given that the motion here has that date associated with it, is there, and this is one of the reasons this was discussed in a special rather than in a committee of the whole for certification later, does staff have a recommendation for an alternative process to set that date?
Thank you, Mayor Hereford. Staff can go away, and if we have the information by tonight, you can put it under business arising and pass a resolution tonight.
Okay. I'd like to, as to Mr. Russell's point of wrapping this all up, I'd love to be able to pass a resolution here at this point that sort of endorses all the feedback that we've provided, and then we can ratify the date as suggested. So do you have an idea that maybe accomplishes something like that, Councillor Stoner?
I just wonder if we can say that council proceed with the legislated public meeting the week of November 13th, 2023 on the 2024-2028 financial plan in this report and with the amendments incorporated from the October 17th special business meeting.
I like that so much, I will second it. And would you like to speak to it?
Yeah. I want to thank staff, obviously, for all their work in guiding us as council and the community through the initial steps of our budget to get us this far. I know it has been a lot of work, and there's been a lot of questions and a lot of change over the conversations. I think, as my council colleagues have mentioned in their comments during this day and in previous budget discussions, this is going to be a challenging budget for our community still. And so while we are down our internal process of budgeting and trying to really wrestle with the pressures on our budget this year, I think our public engagement mid-November will be really important to hear from the community and do a real temperature check on whether that 8.9% is going to be palatable or not at the end of the day. I do still have some reservations there, but I feel much more confident today than I did a few weeks ago to move forward with the budget that we have in front of us, having had a bit more time to digest it, really dive into the details, and understand the rationale behind what is driving this budget. And the reality is, as we've known for a long time, a lot of that is inflationary pressures and non-discretionary changes, and really trying to level up our organization to be able to respond to the growth and changes that are happening within our community. And so I look forward to having those conversations, which will undoubtedly be tough with our community members, but important ones to have through the coming month. Thanks.
Thank you. Other comments, Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, I'll also be supporting the motion, the recommendation. I really sincerely hope that the community takes the opportunity to engage with us at this relatively early stage in the process of budgeting. I know it feels late for us, in the stage of budgeting and even later for staff in the phase of budgeting after all the work I'm sure they've done. But I would like to encourage the community to have a hard look at the budget and give us feedback on the budget before we pass it. Because after we pass the budget and then we get feedback that it wasn't what you wanted, that's a little bit too late to change. So please have a look. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I'll also be supporting this and just want to highlight a couple things that I've highlighted before. I think the amount is a bit uncomfortable. We have historically in Squamish, I think, had much lower year-over-year increases than other municipalities, and this time arguably we're coming more in line with what we've seen elsewhere in BC, which is a little bit challenging given where we've been, but given the big picture, it's not unreasonable. And then especially given our community demands and our aspirations for greater levels of equity and a really good quality of life here, I think it's understandable. I think you can see in our asset management that is a significant driver of these costs, but really critical to reduce the amount of money that our community puts into interest. And it is as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, a bit of a philosophical shift from my perspective. I think a worthwhile one, but one that has some impacts for sure. I think the other piece that I have mentioned in previous meetings is while I have some comfort with what is proposed this year, my concern is that some of the things that we are planning, working on, and doing this year, I'm a little bit worried about our capacity to follow through because it, I think, has additional expenses we haven't seen yet on future year budgets. And so I do wonder, should we, again, are there things we should be pulling it back on this year for the sake of future years? This year is comfortable. It's those future years in our 5-year plan that I'm a little bit more hesitant about. And so we'll appreciate some conversations with the public on that topic and other things that people wish to bring up with us. And thank you so much to everyone. There's been a incredible amount of work and discussion in this, and really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. Other comments? Just speaking in favor of the motion, I really appreciate all of staff's work on this, not just the folks presenting. And you know that when particularly this meeting, when we see the gallery fill with all the folks that have put their mind to what are how to manage the pressures of our community in a responsible way. I think it gives me a lot of confidence moving forward with the budget. My council colleagues for the level of scrutiny that each item received, and I know that this is these discussions have equipped us well to go forward and have the communicate or have the conversations more broadly with the community. I will second Councillor Hamilton's sort of message around encouraging the community to engage with the budget process and with us on the budget itself. It's budgeting is complex. I learn lots of things every time I have a budget workshop. So I really appreciate that, and I do acknowledge to the community it's a big piece of work to consume and to see yourself in. So look forward to having those conversations wherever that date lands coming up in November. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now I will be looking for a motion to close. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor Stoner. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And Council, we're going to recess. We were running a little late, so I made the decision mid-flight to have food brought in for us and we do have a document to circulate for consumption here in preparation for the meeting. So just stick around. Food may be in that room already. Oh, and Chris will, Councillor Pettingill will send you a link for the document. Thank you. And we'll need you in the other link going forward. So I'm going to turn off my camera or leave this meeting. Thank you.